Thank you, Trevor. I know it's a long run now for the morning and the middays, but we try to do it. Following our European history and its paradigms, we tend to imagine that urban is describing a world of masses, malls, and migrants, while rural stands up for a world of natives, neighbors, and natures. In societal terms, the first might represent diversity, the second inclusion. In those differing views, a deep opposition of city and countryside seems to manifest itself, stereotyped indeed, but not really incorrect. And even today, there's a really asymmetric perception of those two spheres of our society, also in the diverse terms of social, cultural, and architectural Baukultur, understood in a broader sense. So in my short paper, I wish to contextualize these two keywords you gave me as title, and I do that by reflecting some of their historical prerequisites as well as their actual coinings. It's obvious that the beginning of the actual conflict about diversity leads us far back in the past. For we know that all pre-modern village communities had always and everywhere to defend their fields, their meadows, and their homes against any external influx of people, against mobility and diversity, to preserve local resources. The historical starting position of the cities, however, was clearly a different one. From their beginning, cities developed in an ambivalence of social closure and social opening. That means, on the one hand, that the number of buildings, businesses, and markets in the medieval towns remained limited to those within the town walls. Insofar, the protection of local resources could also still be considered an urban survival strategy. But on the other hand, cities began to change their course in the European early modern era at the latest. And this caused a transition from the concept of social closure to that of social opening. With the evolution of trans-regional markets and of the labor migration, new people came with new ideas and new products. That's also why Max Weber, in his book Economy and Society, characterized the growing cities as new spaces of settling down together, as he said, and not anymore as old places of local natives. Thus, our modern cities are ultimately the product of a dynamic interaction between migration and market, between mass culture and citizenship. And it is only by opening their gates and walls, physically as well as symbolically, that towns could grow and develop in this manner. And this course of opening could also be witnessed within urban society and culture. Instead of being coined only by localism, convention, and stagnation, they were now increasingly shaped by cosmopolitanism, diversity, and dynamics. So in the city, the pre-modern principle of belonging to a family and a place for a lifetime is more and more confronted by modern identities, by identities of changing living environments and of different ways of living. And it is out of this urban diversity of ethnic origins and social milieus, of cultural patterns and varying lifestyles, that this complex and diffuse urban mixture emerges, at least which today we call super diversity. In any case, diversity thus describes a concept in the history of cities and their self-presentation that is indeed fairly old and tried and tested. Since the early modern period, big trade towns in the Netherlands, Italy, or Germany have promoted themselves as diverse. Of course, they did not use this modern term yet, but they referred to corresponding characteristics of their cities by emphasizing the plurality and variety of trading houses and craftsmanship, of merchants and costumers, of urban architectures and cultural institutions, or by praising the variety of native as well as foreign actors who contributed with their knowledge, with their technology, with their merchandise and money to the local market. So diversity, and that's my very first point, hence appears already in the past as a pivotal principle in designing the cityscape and its population as well as the urban economy and culture. And this increasing entanglement of native and foreign, of the inner and outer world, of economy and culture, all this is also reflected in the new urban topography. For this impact can be observed as special symbolic places and buildings in the cityscape at the market square and the harbor, or at the trade court and the business offices. Diversity, therefore, is already the historic genetic code, so to speak, of our city's architecture, society, and culture. It is out of this process that in the 19th century, the urbanity of the industrial and capitalist modern area results as a specific composition of architecture and traffic, as well as of working and living, of communicating and thinking, in short, of an urban mentality. So what began after 1900 as new urbanity regarding modern city architecture, new ways of housing, living and spending leisure time, broken then in the following decades by wars and crisis, that urbanity has been continued in a new rise of urban culture and civil society since the 1970s. This is due to the conscious introduction of expensive cultural programs and campaigns in order to save cities after their deep crisis during and after the Second World War. We all remember this T-shirt, "I Love New York," which then in 1971 signified both a dramatic call for help as well as a renewed spirit of change. And this idea of help and change meant to save the cities by culture. Ever since, festivals of music and literature, museums and opera houses, open-air concerts and light shows, or culinary cultures and extensive sport facilities have again created attractive inner cities. So the postmodern urban culture receives new accents and outlines also because of the augmenting influx of immigrant groups and tourists. It appears to be more diverse, more colorful, and more international. At the same time, new art scenes, local history societies, ecological movements, and neighborhood initiatives were formed. Together, they initiated new strategies of civil society-orientated thinking and acting. Like this, urban spaces and urban cultures should be shaped by the active participation of the civil society in order to avoid administrative planning mistakes as well as harmful economic developments. The impact of this new culturalization of the inner cities is, at any rate, really dramatic. It means that the postmodern urban society forms itself in new and various shapes of a social opening as well as of a cultural communication. Urban spaces and municipal policies get renegotiated from a moral position. And urban mentalities get reorientated from the strict focus of economic efficiency to the open values of a cultural hedonism. In short, during the past few years, our towns have been experiencing a proper cultural revolution, which has made them indeed the stage and the arena of a new and manifold urban culture on a large scale. This too is and means the basis of an urban culture as a long and strong tradition of diversity until today. Therefore, my second keyword is inclusion. It is on this public stage of the urban spaces that we present ourselves with our lifestyles and our life plans. It is there where we live out our ideas and search for our social networks. And it is there where we enjoy the freedom to portray ourselves as autonomous individuals and as authentic identities, staging culture. However, we also increasingly notice the social inequality and injustice in our urban societies. And we assume responsibility for those issues on behalf of civil society, for immigrants and refugees, for homeless and social deprived people. In the last few years, there has been an outright explosion of the numbers of civil society initiatives. They all are, to a new degree, politically and culturally engaged in European towns. And they do represent the social majority, despite all that yelling coming from those Gaulands, Orbáns, and Kaczynskis, who try to dissuade us from being empathetic and from taking care of the other. Here, too, I can recognize a distinctive trait of the urban society and culture. As the modern city has been created through continuous migration and through various minorities, it has also been obliged at an early stage to develop special concepts for integration and inclusion in order to tame social heterogeneity and difference. On the one hand, this concerns strategies for dealing with urban immigration and the resulting transformations of the economic and social cityscapes. Migrant spaces and minoritarian lifestyles have played a crucial role in shaping European cities over the centuries. And since '89 at latest, they have been making an essential contribution towards the actual international and cosmopolitan profilings of our urban spaces and cultures. They are foreign music and fashion, body politics and greeting rituals, as well as culinary cultures and sporting activities have long been integrated, even ennobled. Qigong, Caribbean sound, and sushi now have long been representing, so to speak, as native local culture. On the other hand, the historical urban culture already featured numerous means and rituals of social integration in the form of public meetings, of religious holidays and ceremonies, and of commercial fairs and markets. These examples demonstrate both the principle of negotiation and communication and the principle of competition and conflict. So, in essence, it is about the tradition of both, of an urban integration policy as well as of an urban lifestyle of social inclusion, which has always been open for social immigration and for cultural change. This process had its foundation in the great heterogeneity of ethnic origins, of social experiences, of cultural lifestyles, and political interests. Therefore, it is not local convention and local normativity that are its aims, but open and negotiable diversity and plurality. Thinking about urban culture thus means thinking of those old shooting matches and carnival processions, of town anniversaries and craftsman fairs, of ceremonies and memorial days that have long been established elements of the urban tradition. But nowadays, above all, we have also to think about the broad variety of very new urban institutions and formations, about music events and theater festivals, culinary cultures and farmers' markets, about clothing and food banks, sport associations and football fans, about children's and youth cultures, park rangers and urban gardening, about aid for refugees and the elderly, basically about all these new and young urban traditions. Traditions of an urban society which, formed now as a civil society, is focused on communication and cooperation. This too means urban inclusion in the very sense, the systematic evolution of urban forms of social knowledge and cultural practices, organized and performed in everyday life of neighborhoods and quarters, and all this in order to organize the daily negotiation of urban affairs in new and public urban spaces. And thanks to this new liveliness, the public space itself begins to produce new experiences and demands, new institutions and infrastructures. So street cafes and music bars, art events and demonstrations, urban gardens and parks. It is being transformed more than ever before into a lived and not just a built space, as a spatial and symbolical we, a place of succeeding inclusion. But in fact, not without problems and obstacles. As for between generations, this is due to the urban lifestyles often changing between generations, bringing out distinctions between parents and children, because the idea of individual autonomy includes the ability to choose and design own ways of living. And this comprises a free decision about the question of which social, cultural, ethnic, and religious elements of the parents' heritage should be retained. In this respect, the urban space offers a wide range of cultural concepts of identity, particularly of the younger population, from fashion to body culture, from music to food trends. However, this seemingly boundless anything goes also manifests itself in the social divide of our late modern societies, in the increasing different visions of society in younger and older generations, as well as in urban and rural milieus. Whereas the first apparently have long lived in this society of lifestyles, the latter tend to meet this idea with fear and distrust. Because the big city means also and especially this, the traditional home base, the tribal territory of all the minorities. From historical as well as civic point of view, the city represents the only place where social minorities can gather and organize themselves as communities. But there is at the same time a downside, whereas we praise the new diversity or even super diversity of the urban society and a cosmopolitan urban culture, tolerance between minorities and majorities, other groups perceive this as a red cloth for the bull. The social divide in the Western societies caused by right-wing populists has been linked directly with the rise of the minorities after '68 and the resulting dissolution of the authoritarian post-war societies. Some might argue that the social and national divide has been caused by that new pluralism of the generation of '68 as a result of the social and political establishment of environmental and pacifist initiatives, of minoritarian and feminist movements, and also as a result of the political acceptance of migrants and refugees. And all this shows us that some of those opinions have long been adopted by the new conservative middle of society heading a conservative revolution. So, to conclude, it's obvious that we have ardently to defend and to strengthen our urban traditions of diversity and inclusion against all those attacks of nation-first politicians and of racist politics. And that's, in fact, to convey urbanity as a product of cultural diversity and as a space of freedom, as an invention of generations, migrants and minorities, and as the basis of a new, open as well as common we. This we has to be defended as an open society, living and performing the urban freedom of diversity and the urban tradition of inclusion, and this is at least means urban quality. Thank you.